The day they tried to take my mountain from me didn't start with thunder or sirens. It started with coffee. I was on the front porch of my cabin, watching the first pale strip of sunlight slide over the tops of the pines, mug warm in my hands, lungs full of cold air that tasted like freedom and would smoke. Out here on the ridge, that's what mornings are supposed to sound like. Birds, wind, the creek if you listen hard enough. Not trouble. Then I heard it. Boots on gravel. Not one pair. Several. Heavy, synchronized steps grinding into my driveway like they owned it. I looked up and saw them coming through the morning haze. 4 thick-necked guys piling out of dented pickup trucks, all of them in black polos with crooked white lettering that said Summit Ridge Security. Cheap badges. Mirrored sunglasses. Tattoos climbing out of their collars. And behind them, right in the center like a bad movie villain making her entrance, came Karen Patterson, self-crowned queen of Summit Ridge Estates HOA. She had on this blazing red suit that looked like it had never met a forest trail in its life, heels stabbing into my gravel like she was personally offended by the ground. In her hand, she clutched a clipboard, and the way she held it, you'd think it was a judge's gavel. One of the polo gorillas puffed out his chest and barked, "Open the gate. We have authority here." I almost spit my coffee back into the mug. "Authority," I said, still leaning on the porch post. "On whose land? 'Cause last time I checked, this deed has my name on it, not yours." They didn't like that. I could feel it. The leader moved right up to the gate, giving it a shake like he thought attitude could defeat steel. Karen marched up beside him and jabbed a finger through the bars. "This cabin is in violation of Summit Ridge Estates HOA community standards," she snapped. "Unpermitted structure, unsightly surroundings, unregistered occupancy. You're trespassing on HOA-controlled land, Mr. Ethan Cole." Hearing my full name in her mouth made my jaw tighten. I bought this place in the mountains precisely to escape people like her. Down in town, back in the subdivision days, I'd lived under the rule of another HOA. Letters about my grass being too natural, warnings for leaving my pickup in the driveway, fines for a trash can visible from the road. Back then, I promised myself, if I ever got out, I'd never again let someone with a logo on a letter tell me who I was allowed to be. So when I found this cabin, just a log frame and a creaky porch tucked on the edge of Pine Hollow Ridge, miles outside their neatly drawn HOA lines, I signed before the realtor could even finish the paperwork. The land smelled of pine and rain. The only rules out here were the real ones. Respect the woods, don't burn the mountain down, and pack out your own stupidity. Apparently, no one sent that memo to Karen. It started small, like these things always do. A note shoved under my gate complaining that my unpainted fence posts disrupted community aesthetics. A letter claiming my chainsaw was disturbing neighborhood ambience. Then the official envelopes with the Summit Ridge HOA logo, accusing me of refusing to pay dues. Dues to a club I never joined, on land that wasn't theirs. Every one of those letters went straight into my wood stove. But the thing about people like Karen is, when paper stops working, they escalate. That morning, I could smell bacon crackling in the cast iron pan through the open window. Inside the cabin, my cousins Jake Carter and Mark Dalton, both former Army, both built like the mountain carved them itself, were still sleeping off a late night of cards and whiskey. I figured my day would be chopping wood, maybe a run into town. Nothing complicated. Then the truck showed up. Then the boots hit the gravel. Then the red blazer marched to my gate with a small army of rented arrogance. "You can't just build whatever you want whenever you want," Karen shouted. "This is a stain on property values. My security team has the right to remove you." I stared at her for a long second, then at the word security stitched all crooked across their polos. "Complaints from who?" I asked. "The squirrels? The deer?" The creek feels offended. One of the men gripped the gate and rattled it hard. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, old man." I set my mug down on the railing, carefully, because I didn't want to waste the coffee. "Here's the problem," I said quietly. "This is private land. You don't have a warrant. You don't have authority. What you do have is a bad case of trespassing. So unless you're planning to mow my grass on your way out, I'd turn those trucks around." Karen's voice leapt 2 octaves. "I'll have you evicted. My security team has full enforcement powers." Behind her, her security team looked like they weren't entirely sure whether today's gig was intimidation or helping her carry groceries. Still, they spread out across the gate, trying to form a human wall. My blood was boiling. But underneath the anger, there was this quiet, steady thing. I wasn't alone. Inside, I heard floorboards creak and low voices. Jake and Mark waking up. These men at my gate had no idea they'd just walked into the wrong movie. The tension felt like static in the air. One of the rent-a-cops leaned against his truck, arms folded like he was auditioning for a discount action flick. Another was flicking a lighter, trying to look bored and dangerous at the same time. Karen paced along the gravel like an angry traffic cone, shouting violations and bylaws and threats of bankruptcy. "Block the driveway," she screamed. "Don't let him leave. If he won't comply, we'll make him comply." Their trucks rumbled, moved forward a few inches, forming a clumsy blockade on the public road. Dust puffed up under their tires. They had me technically boxed in. On paper, maybe it looked powerful. From where I stood, it looked pathetic. The cabin door opened behind me. Out stepped Jake, 6'4", tattooed forearms, army t-shirt stretched over shoulders like beams. Right behind him came Mark, shorter but thick, built like the part of the wall you definitely don't want to run into. Jake squinted at the scene. "What's going on, cuz?" Karen spun toward them like she'd just been handed a surprise jury. "Good. Witnesses," she snapped. "These men are trespassing. This structure is illegal. We have orders to remove him from HOA property." Mark scratched his head, still half asleep. "Lady, this is his cabin. He owns the land. The Summit Ridge Estates HOA has jurisdiction here," she shrieked. "These are my officers." Jake looked the officers up and down. The mismatched boots, the cheap gear, the nervous shifting. "You boys look like mall cops who lost your segways," he said. The security leader bristled, neck tattoo twitching. "We're here to maintain order. You civilians don't understand how serious HOA violations can be." Mark let out a low laugh. "Buddy, I've stood under mortar fire overseas. You think we're losing sleep over your citation clipboard?" That's when the air changed. At first, it was just a tremor, somewhere beneath the usual hum of the mountain, a low vibration in the gravel, faint enough you could write it off as imagination. Then it grew stronger, rolling in waves, deep and rhythmic. I knew that sound before I even heard it clearly. So did Jake. So did Mark. Harleys. Real engines. Real torque. Real presence. Karen heard it too, but she didn't want to believe it. Her fingers tightened around the megaphone she'd just fished out of her SUV. She snapped it on and screamed into it like a desperate auctioneer. "Attention! You are in violation of HOA law. Comply immediately or face removal. This is your final warning." Her voice bounced off the slopes, scattering a couple of birds from the treetops. I sighed. "Karen, your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over a pine cone. It sure doesn't have it over my cabin." She pointed the megaphone at me like a weapon. "You'll regret this." The sound in the distance grew louder. Not random traffic. Not a lone bike. This was a pack. The gravel under my boots vibrated. The trees seemed to shiver. Dust rose on the far curve of the road, and tiny flashes of chrome caught the morning sun. Jake smiled. "Right on schedule." The lead security guy tugged at his collar. Who exactly is that?" I couldn't hold back my grin. "That," I said, "is family." A dozen Harley-Davidsons rolled into view, sweeping around the bend like a moving wall of leather and chrome. They rode tight, wheels in rhythm, engines snarling in harmony. On their backs, I could see patches, units, deployments, flags. Not cosplay, not costume. History. At the front was Danny Mercer, my cousin, helmet visor up, eyes hard and steady. He'd done multiple tours overseas. Seen things he never talks about casually. When Danny rode with his brothers, it meant he took the situation seriously. The HOA security squad sank back a step as if pushed by the sound alone. One muttered, "Nope, nope, not what I signed up for." The Harleys fanned out across the road and idled in a semicircle facing the blockade. The engines growled, filling the valley. It was like listening to a war drum made of steel and gasoline. They cut the engines all at once. Silence slammed down heavy. Danny swung off his bike, pulled off his helmet, and walked toward the gate. The other riders fell in behind him in a loose V, not aggressive, just present, like a wall that could move if it needed to. "What's happening here?" Danny asked, voice low, not raised, but carrying more authority than anything I'd heard all morning. Karen rushed forward, waving her clipboard like a desperate flag. "These bikers are trespassing on HOA territory. They have no right to be here." Danny glanced at the gate, the driveway, my cabin behind him, then at me. Funny, he said. Looks like Ethan's property to me. It's private HOA land. Karen snapped. Under my authority. A ripple of laughter moved through the riders. Tommy Briggs, enormous and inked with eagles and anchors, stepped up beside Danny. Ma'am, he said, leaning down so she had to tilt her chin up, the only authority you've got is over whether you use blue ink or black on that clipboard. The fake security men flinched. Karen doubled down. Don't let them scare you. She screamed at her squad. You're Summit Ridge security. You're stronger than they are. Remove him now. That's an order. No one moved. You could see it in their eyes, the calculation, the sudden awareness that they were out of their depth. HOA drama was one thing. A line of combat veterans in leather vests was another. Danny turned to the officers, eyes narrowing just a little. You call this security? Where we come from, security means protecting people, not shaking them down with fake badges. So here's your choice. Boys, walk away with your pride, or stay and explain to the sheriff why you're trespassing with counterfeit authority. One of them scratched his arm, mumbled something about miscommunication. Another pretended to check his phone like he'd just remembered an urgent appointment. Karen's voice cracked. You can't intimidate us. I'll have all of you arrested. Danny's tone shifted, calm, cold, and final. Lady, I've dealt with warlords with more legitimacy than you. You know what they learned? When it's time to walk away. He gave a small nod. The Harleys roared back to life in perfect unison. The engines exploded into a wall of sound. Dust shot up in plumes. Gravel rattled. The fake officers stumbled backward, hands clamped over their ears. One shouted, "Fall back! Fall back!" though no one could hear him. Trucks' doors slammed. Engines coughed to life. In seconds, the blockade fell apart. Vehicles jerking into reverse, tires fishtailing, dust clouds swirling as they fled down the mountain like scared dogs. And then there was just Karen, standing alone in the haze, hair wild, lipstick smeared, eyes wide. I raised my mug and gave her a little toast. Looks like your army just went AWOL, President Patterson. The riders laughed. Jake and Mark laughed. Honestly, even the mountains seemed to laugh. For the first time that day, Karen had nothing to say. When the dust finally settled, the valley fell quiet again. The Harleys idled low. My cousins leaned on the porch rail like they were enjoying the final scene of a good movie. A couple of neighbors had crept out onto the road down the hill, phones out, filming everything. Karen's composure shattered completely when she noticed the cameras. Stop filming, she screeched, spinning in circles. This is official HOA business. Nobody stopped. Danny took a small step toward the gate. His voice softened, just a bit. Karen, go home. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one day. Don't make us repeat ourselves. For a second, I thought she'd blow again, scream, threaten, swing that clipboard like a weapon. But something in her eyes flickered. Fear? Reality? Maybe just the recognition that the audience had turned on her. She spun around, nearly tripping in her stilettos as they caught in the gravel, and stormed to her SUV. The door slammed. The engine sputtered, then revved, and she peeled away in a cloud of frustration and dust. Silence rolled back into the valley like a returning tide. Jake let out a breath. Well, he said, that was more exciting than breakfast. Mark chuckled. Beats coffee for waking you up. I lifted my mug. Sorry, boys. Coffee still wins for me. The riders laughed, the sound big and warm now, no more edge. Neighbors walked up the road, phones still in their hands, grinning like they'd just watched the best live show in town. We saw everything, a woman said. She can scream HOA law all she wants, but everyone now knows. This isn't her land. She doesn't own you. Good, I said, because I'm done letting their letters write history. If the people have cameras, the truth travels faster than her fines. The riders stayed a while. We swapped stories, shook hands, traded jokes about how fast Summit Ridge security had retreated. When they finally saddled up to leave, they formed into formation, engines thrumming. Before they rolled out, they revved in perfect rhythm. A final, earth-shaking roar that wasn't intimidation anymore. It was a message. Don't mess with family. Don't mess with freedom. Don't mess with men who've seen real war and came home to live in peace. Days passed. The mountain returned to its old songs. Creek, wind, chainsaw, owls at night. Then the envelope arrived. Crisp white. Summit Ridge Estates HOA logo stamped on the front like a threat. No return address. Inside, notice of violation. Noise pollution. Fine for $1,750. Reason: excessive unlawful motorcycle noise disturbing community ambience and property values. I laughed so hard I had to set my coffee down. Jake read it and slapped his knee. $4,000 because the bikes sounded too free? Mark smirked. Frame it. So I did. Tacked it right over the fireplace, between a deer rack and elk antlers. Every time I look at it, I don't see a debt. I see a trophy. Proof that she took her best shot and missed so bad she find the sound of loyalty. Word traveled fast. Folks I barely knew came by to shake my hand. An older man from down the road gripped my palm and said, "Son, you did what the rest of us were too tired or scared to do. You stood up to her." It hit me then. This wasn't just my fight. Karen had been bullying the entire ridge with red ink letters and manufactured authority. People had been paying, obeying, shrinking, not because she was right, but because they were tired. Now they'd seen her run. Now they'd seen her bluff get called. She wasn't invincible. She was just loud. A week later, her SUV crawled past my driveway at dusk. She didn't stop. She didn't roll down the window. She didn't scream. She just looked. Behind the glass, behind all that pride and powder, her eyes burned with something mean and unfinished. She wanted a rematch, even if she didn't know what game we were playing anymore. I lifted my mug, gave her the same little toast as before. She hit the gas and disappeared down the road. That night, with the fire cracking in the hearth and whiskey glasses clinking together, Jake, Mark, Danny, and the rest of the riders sat around my table. We replayed the morning, fake badges, red blazer, Harleys over the hill. Laughed at the way those trucks peeled out. Wondered what kind of HOA manual taught, send a fake security squad to intimidate a man on his own land. At some point, I leaned back, stared into the fire, and felt this strange mix of exhaustion and peace. This wasn't just about me, I said quietly, or about her. It's about anyone who's ever been told to shrink so someone else could feel big. Because here's the thing. Bullies never stop on their own. They push until something pushes back. Karen's empire, the letters, the fines, the fear, ended exactly where my property line began. Not because of a law book, not because of a sheriff, but because I decided not to move. Because my cousins showed up. Because my neighbors held up their phones and chose the truth over silence. I raised my glass. To freedom, I said, and to never letting a Karen tell you how to live. The room erupted in laughter and cheers. Outside, Pine Hollow Ridge stood dark and steady, holding every echo like a promise. The Summit Ridge Estates HOA can send 1,000 more fines if it wants. It can invent new bylaws, new letters, new phrases like community ambience. But it will never buy respect. Respect is earned by standing firm, by living honestly, by refusing to bow to fear. And if there's one thing I learned that day, watching trucks flee and Harleys idle in the sun, it's this. Laughter, loyalty, and calm courage are stronger than any clipboard that if someone uses fake authority to scare you. Phony badges, made-up rules, public shaming. Is it morally right to answer with overwhelming presence like I did? Did we simply defend what was ours, or did we cross a line by intimidating the intimidators? In a world full of Karens with clipboards, what does real justice look like? Law, community, or something in between? Tell me, if you were in my boots that morning, what would you have done?